Deep inside a cave in South Africa, 30 meters below the surface in total darkness, scientists found something that should not exist. Tiny bones, glowing red under a special blue light. Bones that were burned not by accident, not by a wildfire, but by something else. Something that walked into that cave on two legs, carried fire with it, and kept that fire alive long enough to leave a mark that would survive for almost 2 million years. When researchers finally confirmed what they were looking at, they realized they had just rewritten one of the oldest chapters in the story of humanity. Humans, or rather our ancient ancestors, were using fire 1.8 million years earlier than anyone believed possible. Let that number sink in for a second, because it is almost impossible to comprehend. If you don't believe science can still shock us this deeply, smash that like button right now, because this discovery is about to change how you think about your own ancestors. The story begins at a place called Wonderwork Cave, tucked into the Kalahari Desert in South Africa's northern Cape Province, about 60 kilometers south of a small town called Kuruman. Wonderwork is not just any cave. Archaeologists have been digging here since the 1940s, and the deeper they go, the further back in time they travel. This cave holds a continuous record of human occupation stretching back almost 2 million years, making it one of the most important prehistoric sites on the entire planet. Layer after layer of sediment, stacked like pages in a book that nobody has fully read yet. And buried in those pages, researchers just found a sentence that nobody expected. Back in 2012, a team working at Wonderwork made global headlines when they announced evidence of fire use dating back roughly 1 million years. At the time, that was already a stunning find, one of the oldest pieces of evidence for intentional fire use anywhere in the world. It suggested that early human relatives were already experimenting with flame long before modern humans existed. But science rarely stops at the first answer. A new international team, led by researchers, including Michael Chazan from the University of Toronto, went back to Wonderwork to dig deeper, quite literally, into an older layer of the cave known as stratum 11. What they found there did not just confirm the old date, it shattered it completely. If a discovery from 2012 already blew people's minds, imagine what a number nearly double that size does. Make sure you've hit subscribe, because the next part of this story gets even stranger. So how exactly do you prove that something burned 1.8 million years ago, when the evidence is nothing more than tiny, fragile bones buried under a literal mountain of dirt? This is where the real breakthrough happened, and it has almost nothing to do with digging and everything to do with light. The research team developed and applied a brand new non-destructive luminescence technique. Here is the simple version of how it works. When bone tissue is exposed to intense heat, its internal crystal structure physically changes. That altered structure behaves differently when light hits it. Scientists shine a narrow beam of blue light at a very specific wavelength of 455 nanometers onto the ancient bone fragments. Then they look at the bone through a red filter. If the bone was never burned, nothing special happens. But if that bone was once exposed to fire, even almost 2 million years ago, it glows back at them with a faint, eerie red light. Scientists are literally using light to talk to bones that are nearly 2 million years old. The bones are answering. If that doesn't give you chills, I don't know what will. Drop a like on this video right now if science just became your new favorite horror movie. To make sure this glowing effect wasn't some weird coincidence or a trick of nature, the researchers didn't just trust the glow on its own. They cross-checked everything using Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, a well-established chemical method for detecting heat damage in organic material. They tested their luminescence method on modern bones that they deliberately burned themselves under controlled laboratory conditions. They even compared results against archaeological bone samples from a completely different site, a Bronze Age location in Spain, just to see if the technique held up across different time periods and conditions. In every single case, the luminescence readings matched the chemical spectroscopy results, two completely independent scientific methods, pointing at the exact same conclusion. That kind of overlap is incredibly rare in archaeology, and it is exactly the kind of evidence that turns a wild theory into an accepted scientific fact. Now here comes the part that really seals the deal, and it is honestly one of the cleverest pieces of detective work in recent archaeological history. The bones the scientists tested weren't human bones, and they weren't from large animals hunted by early humans either. They were tiny bones, fragments from small mammals and birds, the kind of bones you would find inside owl pellets. For those unfamiliar, owls swallow their prey whole and later regurgitate the indigestible parts, bones, fur, and all, in a compact little pellet. Barn owls have been nesting in caves like Wonderwork for hundreds of thousands of years, dropping these pellets onto the cave floor completely naturally, with zero human involvement. This matters enormously, because it means these hit that like button, because we are not even at the craziest part yet. Here is where the location of the discovery becomes almost as important as the discovery itself. The burnt bones were not found near the cave entrance, where you might expect smoke or embers from an outside wildfire to drift in naturally. They were found roughly 30 meters inside the cave, deep in near total darkness, far beyond any point where a natural grass fire or lightning strike could possibly reach. Wildfires do not crawl 30 meters into solid rock formations. They simply cannot, which leaves only one explanation that fits the evidence. Something carried fire into that cave, deliberately, and kept it burning there. Researchers also ruled out another possible natural cause, spontaneous combustion from bat guano, because the layer in question showed no significant guano deposits at all. Every alternative explanation gets eliminated one by one, and the only thing left standing is this. A creature walked 30 meters into pitch, darkness, carrying flame, and chose to keep it alive in that specific spot. If you don't think that sends shivers down your spine, you clearly haven't thought about it long enough yet. Smash that like button if this story just gave you goosebumps. So who exactly was doing this? Researchers believe the most likely culprit is Homo erectus, an early human ancestor species that lived across Africa and parts of Asia for well over 1 million years. Homo erectus is associated with the early Acheulean stone tool culture, and sure enough, stone tools from that exact tradition were found in the very same archaeological layers as the burnt bones. This is not a random coincidence. Tools and fire side by side in the same chapter of the same cave, dated to the same astonishing time period of somewhere between 1.07 million and 1.79 million years ago. To put that range into perspective, modern Homo sapiens, our own species, wouldn't even exist for another roughly 1 million years after this fire was burning inside Wonderwork Cave. Homo erectus was tending flames in the dark long before anything resembling a modern human ever took a single breath. If your mind isn't blown by that timeline, I genuinely don't know what it would take. Make sure you're subscribed, because history just got a whole lot older and a whole lot stranger. To really understand how significant this is, you have to understand who Homo erectus actually was. This was not some half-formed hominin species to walk with a stride remarkably close to our own, the first to consistently use sophisticated, symmetrical stone tools known as Acheulean hand axes, and the first species in the entire history of life on Earth to spread far beyond Africa, reaching into the Middle East, across Asia, and into parts of Europe. This was a species built for endurance, for long-distance travel, for adapting to environments wildly different from the savanna it first evolved in. And now we know it was also a species that understood, on some practical level, that fire was worth the risk and effort of carrying. Put those pieces together and you start to see a much more capable, much more intelligent ancestor than most people ever picture when they imagine early humans. If this is changing how you picture your own ancestors, smash that like button, because there's still more to unpack. It also helps to compare Wonderwork Cave to other famous ancient fire sites around the world, because the contrast tells its own story. At a site called Gesher Benot Yaakov in Israel, researchers have documented evidence of controlled fire use dating back somewhere between 690,000 and 790,000 years ago, tied to either Homo erectus or a closely related species called Homo ergaster. In China, at a site called Xihudu in Shaanxi province, scientists found mammal bones bearing the telltale black, blue, and grayish-green discoloration patterns that come specifically from prolonged exposure to fire. At another Chinese site called Yuanmu, in Yunnan province, archaeologists uncovered blackened mammal bones dating back roughly 1.7 million years, a number that, interestingly, lines up almost perfectly with the new Wonderwork Cave findings, even though the two sites sit on completely different continents. When evidence from opposite sides of the ancient world starts pointing toward the same general timeline, that is not a coincidence anymore. That is a pattern. And patterns, in science, are exactly how theories become accepted facts. Comment below if you find it just as wild as I do that early humans on two separate continents may have figured out fire around the very same era. Compare all of that to what we know about deliberate fire making, the actual ability to strike a spark and create a flame from nothing, rather than simply finding and preserving one. That skill, as mentioned earlier, doesn't show up clearly in the archaeological record until around 400,000 years ago at the Barnum site in England, where researchers found baked earth alongside flint and a mineral called pyrite, the same basic spark-generating combination still used by some traditional fire-starting methods today. Interestingly, pyrite isn't naturally found anywhere near Barnum, which means whoever lived there had to travel tens of kilometers specifically to obtain it. A strong signal that fire-making, by that point, had become a deliberate, planned, almost ritualized activity rather than a lucky accident. Other ancient sites tell similar stories at different points along this timeline E. Burned flint tools near Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, dated to roughly 300,000 years ago, were found in the same sediment layer as some of the earliest known Homo sapiens skull fragments ever discovered. Multiple sites across Spain and France, including Torralba, Ambrona, and Terra Amata, show clear evidence of maintained hearths, ash deposits, and fire-cracked stone tools dating from roughly 400,000 to 200,000 years ago. Lay all of these discoveries out side by side on a single timeline, and you can practically watch fire technology evolve in real time, stretching from opportunistic ember carrying nearly 2 million years ago, all the way to confident, deliberate fire-making by around 400,000 years ago. If seeing that entire evolutionary arc laid out like this excites you as much as it excites me, hit that like button right now. But before you imagine Homo erectus rubbing two sticks together like a survival expert on a reality television show, researchers want to be very clear about one crucial detail. This discovery does not prove that these early humans could actually create fire from scratch. There's a massive difference between using fire and making fire, and that distinction matters enormously in archaeology. According to the current scientific consensus, humans did not reliably master the skill of striking sparks and starting fires on demand until roughly 400,000 years ago, based on separate evidence found at a site called Barnham in Suffolk, England, where archaeologists discovered baked sediment alongside flint and pyrite, materials specifically used to generate sparks. That means for well over 1 million years, somewhere in the range of 1.3 million years or more, early humans were almost certainly fire users without being firemakers. They were opportunists of the highest order, watching the African savanna for natural blazes sparked by lightning strikes or spontaneous wildfires, then doing something no other animal on Earth was doing. They walked toward the flames, collected burning embers or smoldering branches, and carried that fire back to their shelter. If you think early human-esque were simple, primitive creatures, this discovery proves they were doing something far more sophisticated than anyone gave them credit for. Like this video right now, if you're starting to respect your ancient ancestors a little more, think about what that actually required. On a cognitive level, you don't just casually pick up fire and walk away with it. You need to understand that flame consumes fuel and will die without it. You need to gather the right kind of material, twigs, dry grass, or in this case, possibly even the bones from those owl pellets themselves, since researchers suggest these tiny, fat-rich bone fragments may have served as convenient fuel. You need to protect that flame from wind and rain during transport. And then, once you arrive at your destination, you need to actively tend it, feeding it steadily so it doesn't die out, but also keeping it controlled so it doesn't spread and burn down your own shelter. This is forward planning. This is risk management. This is resource control, executed by a species that existed nearly 2 million years before the invention of writing, before agriculture, before anything we typically associate with civilization. Homo erectus was managing one of nature's most dangerous and unpredictable forces, with a level of intentionality that researchers are only now beginning to fully appreciate. If that doesn't earn a like from you, I genuinely don't know what would. And this wasn't a one-time fluke either. Researchers found burnt remains in distinct clusters throughout the cave, scattered across the relevant layers in a pattern that strongly suggests repeated, intentional burning events, occurring again and again over an extended span of time, rather than one isolated accident frozen into the geological record. This means that bringing fire into Wonderwork Cave wasn't a single moment of luck. It was a behavior, a habit, something these early humans returned to over and over across countless generations. They learned somehow that the deep, dark recesses of this cave were worth the effort of hauling fire into. Why bother? The benefits explain themselves once you think it through. Fire deep inside a cave provides warmth on cold desert nights. It provides light in a place where the sun never reaches. And it provides one of the most powerful psychological deterrents against the predators that almost certainly prowled the African landscape back then. Lions, hyenas, saber-toothed cats, all of them naturally cautious around flame. A group of early humans gathered around. A fire 30 meters inside solid rock would have been astonishingly safe compared to sleeping out in the open. Subscribe right now if you want to keep uncovering secrets like this one, because human history apparently still has plenty left to reveal. Now let's talk about why this particular study is being taken so seriously by the scientific community, rather than being dismissed as just another sensational headline. One archaeologist from the University of Granada in Spain, Juan Manuel Jimenez Arenas, who was not involved in the research, publicly praised the sheer depth of evidence the team assembled. He pointed out that the location of the remains, 30 meters from the modern cave entrance, makes it extremely unlikely that burning material simply drifted in by accident from outside. He also highlighted how the fires appeared again and again throughout the layered sequence of the cave's history, rather than as a single suspicious anomaly. At the same time, he offered a fair word of caution, noting that claims capable of rewriting our understanding of human prehistory demand an extraordinarily high level of proof before they're fully accepted. That balance of genuine excitement paired with healthy scientific skepticism is exactly how real, trustworthy science is supposed to work. Comment below and let me know if you think this evidence is strong enough to convince you completely, because the debate among experts is still very much alive. It's also worth pointing out just how unusual it is for a study like this to get published in a major peer-reviewed journal like PLOS One without facing immediate, overwhelming pushback. Extraordinary claims about human prehistory tend to get torn apart in peer review, and rightfully so, because the history of archaeology is littered with confident announcements that later fell apart under closer scrutiny. The fact that this particular study survived that process and is now being discussed seriously by archaeologists, paleoanthropologists, and geologists from multiple countries and institutions tells you something important. This isn't a fringe theory pushed by a single lab chasing headlines. It's a carefully built, cross-verified, methodologically transparent piece of research that the wider scientific community is taking at face value, while still demanding more confirming evidence from other sites before fully rewriting the textbooks. That is exactly how trustworthy science should behave. Cautious enough to avoid hype, but open enough to accept genuinely strong evidence when it shows up. If you appreciate that kind of intellectual honesty in science, drop a like, because it's becoming rarer to see in a world full of overhyped headlines. There's also a deeper, almost philosophical layer to this discovery that's worth sitting with for a moment. For most of human history, we've told ourselves a fairly simple story about our own intelligence. The idea that each major leap forward, language, tools, fire, agriculture, happened in a clean, orderly sequence, each skill building neatly on the last. But discoveries like this one suggest the real story was far messier, far longer, and far more interesting. Fire use? It turns out it wasn't a single light bulb moment where some genius ancestor suddenly invented controlled flame. It was a slow, uneven, multi-stage process that unfolded over close to 1.5 million years, starting with opportunistic ember scavenging, evolving into careful, repeated ember transport and maintenance, and only much, much later maturing into the ability to create fire from scratch on command. Humanity's relationship with one of its most defining technologies wasn't a sudden spark of brilliance. It was a long, patient, multi-generational relationship built one ember at a time. If that reframes how you think about human progress, make sure to like this video before you keep watching. It's worth zooming out for a moment to understand just how significant fire really was for the future of our entire species. Researchers studying human evolution have long argued that mastering fire, even in this early, opportunistic form, triggered a chain reaction of changes throughout the human body and human society. Fire meant protection, which meant early humans could settle in places that previously would have been far too dangerous to inhabit after dark. Fire eventually led to cooking, and cooking effectively pre-digests food outside the body, unlocking dramatically more calories and nutrients from the exact same ingredients. Some researchers studying ancient skeletons even believe this dietary shift is linked to physical changes that show up in the fossil record over time, including gradual reductions in jaw size and tooth dimensions in later Homo erectus. Populations, as the body adapted to softer, easier to chew, fire-processed food instead of tough roots and raw meat. Fire transformed nights from a time of vulnerability into a time of warmth, safety, and likely the very first moments of structured social gathering around a shared light source. If you think about it, the campfire you might sit around today on a camping trip is a direct cultural descendant of something that began nearly 2 million years ago. That connection alone deserves a like, because it links you directly to your most distant ancestors. So what happens next? The same research team behind this Wonderwork cave discovery has stated clearly that this luminescence technique isn't just a one-off success story. It's a brand new tool that can now be applied to other archaeological sites scattered across the globe. Sites in East Africa, sites across Europe and Asia, places where evidence of ancient fire use may already be sitting in storage drawers and museum collections, simply waiting for someone to shine the right wavelength of blue light onto the right bone. Fragment. This single breakthrough could trigger a wave of new discoveries in the coming years, potentially pushing the known history of fire use back even further, or confirming similar patterns of fire management at entirely different prehistoric locations around the world. We may genuinely be standing at the beginning of a complete rewrite of one of the most important chapters in the human story. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next discovery, because at this rate, it might not take very long to arrive. When you really sit back and absorb everything this discovery represents, it becomes almost overwhelming. 1.8 million years ago, long before language as we understand it, long before art, long before agriculture, long before anything resembling a city or a tool more complex than a sharpened stone, a creature that was not yet fully human stood at the edge of a wildfire on the African savanna, and instead of running away in fear like every other animal on the planet, it walked toward the flame, It picked up an ember. It carried that ember for who knows how long across unknown distances, protecting it from wind and rain the entire way. And then it walked 30 meters into the absolute darkness of a cave, and it set that ember down, and it kept it alive. That single act, repeated over and over across countless generations, eventually led directly to the campfires of every culture in human history, the hearths inside every home you've ever lived in, the stove in your kitchen right now, and quite literally the light from the screen you're watching this very video on. Every single piece of technology humanity has ever built traces back, in some twisted, beautiful way, to a creature in a South African cave that simply refused to let a flame die out. If that thought doesn't give you a new sense of respect for where we came from, I honestly don't know what will. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me what part of this story shocked you the most, because this is far from the last time science is going to rewrite what we thought we knew about being human.